Prosecutor's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. The United States calls Special Agent Hartley to the stand. I watched my brother's face go the color of old chalk. He turned slowly in his chair at the defendant's table, and when his eyes found mine across that packed courtroom, I didn't look away. Not this time. 3 years earlier, I'd been sitting at the wrong end of a Thanksgiving table in Denton, Texas, getting lectured about my life choices over sweet potato casserole. My brother had always been the golden one, 12 years older than me, already a partner at a white shoe law firm in Dallas when I was still figuring out how to parallel park. Our parents talked about him the way people talk about a championship trophy, with reverence, with pride, with the kind of careful handling that makes everything else in the room seem ordinary by comparison. I was ordinary by comparison. I dropped out of UT Austin in my junior year, not because I was failing, I had a 3.4 GPA, but because the FBI was offering me something the accounting program couldn't, a path into financial crimes investigation through their collegiate honors program. I'd applied on a whim, gotten called back again, and then one Thursday morning, a recruiter named Agent Morales sat across from me in a Starbucks on Guadalupe Street and explained what my next 5 years could look like. I took the offer. I left school. I told my family I was taking a break to figure things out. That was my mistake, not leaving, keeping the secret. I thought I was protecting something. The truth is, I was terrified of what would happen if I told them, and it didn't work out. So I let them fill in the blanks themselves. "She's just drifting," my aunt said at Easter. I heard her through the kitchen door. "She always had potential," my mother said in that particular tone that turns a compliment into a eulogy. And my brother, my brilliant, successful, pinstriped brother, would give me that smile across the dinner table. Patient, pitying, the smile you give someone who doesn't know they're already losing. "You could still go back and finish," he told me once. "Plenty of people take a gap year at 22. Nothing to be embarrassed about." I was 23. I'd already been through 16 weeks of Quantico. I smiled back and asked him to pass the rolls. The Thanksgiving I'm thinking about was the last normal one we ever had, though I didn't know that yet. My brother hosted it that year, him and his wife in their 5-bedroom house in South Lake, the kind of suburb where every lawn looks like a magazine cover and every garage holds at least one car that costs more than my first apartment. His wife had made the table beautiful, I'll give her that. Linen napkins, real china, little handwritten place cards. My card said Jessie, my nickname, the one only family used, and I remember thinking that was the last kind thing about the evening. My brother's business partner was there with his wife, a few colleagues, my parents, my aunt and her husband, 11 people total, and within 20 minutes of sitting down, I understood that I was the designated cautionary tale for the evening. It started small, the way these things always do. "Jessie's still figuring things out," my mother said to my brother's partner who had made the mistake of asking what I did. "I work in financial analysis," I said, which was technically true and completely misleading, and I watched my brother's mouth twitch. "She means she does bookkeeping for a small firm," he said. "Entry-level stuff. Nothing wrong with it. Everyone has to start somewhere." I didn't do bookkeeping. I was 8 months into my first field assignment embedded in a financial crimes task force in Fort Worth, tracing shell company transactions for a federal investigation I couldn't talk about in any room that wasn't cleared. "You know," his partner said, turning back to his wine, "my nephew couldn't finish college either. Ended up driving for Uber for a while. He's okay now, though. Works at a dealership." Someone changed the subject. My brother refilled his glass. I cut my turkey into very small pieces and said nothing. Later, in the kitchen, I overheard my brother talking to our dad by the sink. They thought I'd gone to the bathroom. I'd actually just stepped into the pantry for a minute because I needed 10 seconds of silence. "I just worry about her long term," my brother was saying. "She's bright, she's always been bright, but she's not doing anything with it. She could have been something." "She's still young," my dad said. "She's 23. I had my first clerkship at 23. If she doesn't get back on track soon," he trailed off, I don't know. I just don't want her to wake up at 40 and realize she wasted her 20s. I stood very still in that pantry between a shelf of canned goods and a box of aluminum foil, and I let those words settle into my chest like stones dropped in water. Then I walked back to the table and asked my sister-in-law if there was more gravy. The investigation that would eventually lead to that courtroom started 18 months before Thanksgiving, when a forensic accountant on our task force flagged a series of transactions moving through a Dallas-based real estate holding company called Meridian Crest LLC. Nothing about Meridian Crest looked unusual on the surface. It held properties, it had investors, it filed the right paperwork, but the patterns were off. Money coming in from offshore accounts in amounts just under federal reporting thresholds, a technique called structuring or smurfing in the industry. Dozens of small deposits instead of one large one spread across multiple accounts, then consolidated and moved again before anyone looked too closely. Someone was laundering money through Texas real estate, significant money. We were talking about transactions totaling nearly $40 million over 3 years. I was assigned to trace the corporate structure. Who owned what, who signed what, where the money actually went when it left Meridian Crest's accounts. It was painstaking work, hours of spreadsheets, court orders for financial records, subpoenas that took months to process. But I was good at it. That was the thing nobody in my family understood because they'd never seen me work. I was genuinely, demonstrably good at this. 6 months in, I found a name on a filing that stalked me cold. Not the LLC name. Not the registered agent, a name buried in an operating agreement from 3 years earlier listed as a silent managing partner. A name I'd grown up hearing at every dinner table, every holiday, every family gathering for my entire life. My brother. I sat at my desk for a long time after that, long enough that my supervisor eventually came over and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. I asked to be excused for the rest of the day. I drove to a park near my apartment and sat on a bench and tried to figure out if I was misreading it, if there was another explanation, if it was a coincidence of names. I ran through every possible alternative in my head, and when I ran out of alternatives, I drove back to the office and told my supervisor what I'd found. She looked at the document for a long time. "You need to recuse yourself," she said. "I know," I said. "If this goes where it looks like it's going, you'll be asked to testify." "I know." "And you found this legitimately, following standard investigative procedure. The document is what it is." "I know," I said again. She nodded. "Go home, get some sleep, come back tomorrow and we'll figure out next steps." I went home. I did not sleep. What came next was the hardest year of my life, and I've had some hard years. The investigation expanded. My brother wasn't just a passive investor, he was a key architect of the scheme, using his legal expertise to set up the corporate structures, to identify the loopholes, to make everything look legitimate enough to survive a cursory audit. He had at least 3 other attorneys involved. The money being laundered belonged to a narcotics trafficking organization based out of Laredo. My brother, who had lectured me about wasting my potential, had been helping drug traffickers clean their money through Texas real estate for 4 years. I learned this in stages, the way you learn that someone you love has been living a double life. Each new piece of evidence arrived like a small impact, manageable on its own, catastrophic in accumulation. I kept going to family dinners. I had to. Disappearing suddenly would have raised questions, and the investigation required that nothing seemed unusual. So I sat at tables and ate food and answered questions about my life and watched my brother talk about ethics and integrity and the importance of reputation, and I smiled and nodded and said nothing. My mother called me once, in the middle of it all, to tell me my brother was being considered for a federal judgeship. She was so proud. Her voice was trembling with it. "Isn't that something?" she said. "Your father and I are just so proud." "That's great, Mom," I said. "You know, honey, you could still, if you went back and finished your degree." "I have to go," I said. "Work thing." I hung up and sat in my car in the parking garage under my building for 45 minutes. The judgeship never happened. By the time the nomination process began background checks, we were already 6 weeks from indictment. My supervisor asked me twice if I wanted to step back from the case entirely. There were grounds for it. No one would have thought less of me. Both times I said no. Part of it was professional. I had built most of the financial case. I knew the documentation better than anyone on the team. Removing myself at a critical stage would have created gaps that might have taken months to fill, and there were real victims here. Communities where drug money had corrupted housing markets, families destroyed by the trafficking operation my brother had helped sustain. But part of it was something I'm less comfortable admitting. I needed to see it through, not for revenge. I want to be careful about that word because it's too simple. I needed to see that what I had done with my life meant something, that the years I'd spent learning to read financial records, sitting through depositions, working weekends while my brother's colleagues assumed I was still figuring things out, I needed those years to count. The indictment came on a Tuesday in March. My brother was at his office when they arrested him. His assistant called our mother, who called our father, who called me. "There must be some mistake," my dad said. His voice sounded thin, like paper held up to light. "There isn't," I said. Silence. "How do you know that?" I took a breath. "Because I work for the FBI, Dad, financial crimes. I've been an agent for 3 years. I was part of the team that built this case." The silence that followed was the longest of my life. My family's reaction was complicated, which is the most generous way I can put it. My mother cried. Not about my brother, initially about me, about the secret, about feeling like she hadn't known her own daughter. That was the conversation that hurt most, strangely. Not the anger. The hurt. My aunt called me a traitor. She used that exact word. "You're a traitor to this family." She said it twice, like she thought the repetition would land harder. My father didn't call me anything. He just got very quiet, the way he gets when something has broken past the point where he knows how to respond. We didn't speak for 6 weeks. My brother's wife, I won't say her name because she became part of the case eventually, though she cooperated with prosecutors and her charges were significantly reduced. She sent me a text that just said, "How could you?" No question mark, just the words. I typed and deleted about 15 responses before I put my phone in a drawer and left it there. My supervisor gave me 2 weeks of administrative leave to deal with the fallout. I used it to sit in my apartment, eat cereal at irregular hours, and watch nature documentaries with the sound off. I was not okay. I want to be honest about that. I was doing the right thing and I was not okay, and both of those things were true simultaneously. The trial was in October. Federal court in Fort Worth, Judge Abernathy presiding. My brother had a team of defense attorneys naturally. They were good. They spent 3 weeks trying to establish that the financial records I'd analyzed were incomplete, that my methodology was flawed, that my personal connection to the defendant made my testimony inherently biased. On the 4th day of the prosecution's case, the AUSA Assistant United States Attorney stood at the podium and called the next witness. The United States calls Special Agent Cassandra Hartley. I'd practiced this. I'd gone over my testimony with the prosecution team 4 times. I knew the documents cold. I knew where every question would lead and what the answer had to be, delivered calmly, without emotion, because emotion on the stand is ammunition for the defense. I walked to the stand. I was sworn in. I stated my name, my position, my years of service. And then I looked at the defense table. My brother was watching me. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, not physically, but something in him had compressed, like air leaving a space. He had the expression of a man watching something happen that he'd told himself would never happen, right up until it did. I turned back to the AUSA and answered her first question. 3 hours later, on cross-examination, the defense attorney tried the personal angle. "Agent Hartley," he said, with a particular kind of gentleness that was really just condescension with better lighting, "this is your brother sitting at that table, your family member, and you're here today, testifying against him. Does that not trouble you at all?" I looked at him for a moment. "Yes," I said, "it troubles me every day." Then, "It troubles me that he made the choices he made. It troubles me that the families affected by the trafficking operation will never get those years back. It troubles me that justice required this particular path. But my personal discomfort doesn't change what the documents show, and the documents show what they show. The defense attorney looked at his notes. "No further questions," he said. "My brother was convicted on 7 counts of money laundering and 2 counts of conspiracy. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. The other attorneys involved received varying sentences. The trafficking organization was dismantled in a separate case that concluded 6 months later." After the verdict, the AUSA shook my hand in the hallway outside the courtroom. She said I was one of the best witnesses she'd ever prepared. Composed, precise, credible. I thanked her. I went to the women's restroom and sat in a stall for about 5 minutes, doing the kind of breathing you do when you're holding something very large in place inside your chest. Then I washed my hands and went back out. My father called me 2 days after the verdict. It was a Sunday morning, and I was on my 2nd cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with his name. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. My dad is not a man who leads with apologies, so I understood that this had cost him something. "You don't have to." "I do." He was quiet for a second. "I never asked you what you were doing. All those years, I just assumed. Your mother and I both assumed. We never asked." "I couldn't have told you," I said. "Not until it was over." "I know, but I could have asked. I should have looked closer." Another pause. "I'm proud of you. I want you to know that. I know it's late and I know it probably doesn't fix anything, but I am." I stared out my kitchen window at the parking lot below. "It fixes some things," I said. "My mother and I are still working on it." That's the honest answer. She's not a villain. She's a woman who loved her son enormously and is grieving the version of him she thought she knew. That grief is real, and it doesn't leave room for much else right now. We talk on the phone every couple of weeks. We're careful with each other. I think we'll get there eventually. My aunt still doesn't speak to me. I've made my peace with that. My brother wrote me a letter from the facility where he's serving his sentence. I've read it 3 times. I haven't written back yet. I'm not sure what to say that would be honest and also bearable. I'm still figuring that out. What I know is this: I didn't ruin my family. My brother did that. The choices he made, the ones he made, freely and with full legal knowledge of their consequences. Those choices were the thing that broke us. I just followed the evidence to where it led, the way I was trained to do, the way I believed was right. I still believe that. I'm 31 now. I got promoted 8 months after the trial, supervisory special agent, financial crimes unit, regional office. My name is on a plaque in a hallway I walk past every morning on the way to my desk. Sometimes I think about that pantry at Thanksgiving, the shelf of canned goods, the box of aluminum foil. My brother's voice carrying through the kitchen wall, patient and pitying, talking about what I might have been. I think he wasn't entirely wrong, you know. I could have been something. Turns out I already was. I still think about that pantry sometimes. The smell of canned beans and dish soap, my brother's voice coming through the wall like he was talking about a stranger. She could have been something. Past tense, like I was already a closed case. What I know now, on the other side of all of it, is that the things people say about you in hallways and kitchens, the quiet assessments, the careful pity, those things only have as much power as you give them. For a long time, I gave them a lot. I carried those words into every early morning at my desk, every weekend I worked while my peers were at brunch, every time I doubted whether the path I'd chosen was real or just a story I told myself. What eventually got me through wasn't anger. Anger burns fast. What carried me was something slower and sturdier, the plain decision to keep doing the work, even when no one was watching and no one knew. That's the part nobody sees in stories like mine. Not the courtroom moment, not the verdict, not the prosecutor calling your name in a room full of people who once wrote you off. What nobody sees is the Tuesday afternoon when you're alone with a spreadsheet that makes no sense, and you could close the laptop and go home and nobody would notice, but you don't. You stay. You follow one more transaction thread, you ask one more question of the data. Not because you're trying to prove anything to anyone, just because it matters and you know it, and that's enough. My brother was brilliant. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters. He wasn't stupid or careless. He was methodical, strategic, trained in exactly the kind of legal reasoning that should have made him one of the best. The difference between us, in the end, wasn't intelligence. It was what we chose to do with it. He used everything he knew to bend rules until they broke. I used everything I knew to follow them where they led, even when they led somewhere I didn't want to go. That's not a small thing. It turns out to be everything. There's a kind of integrity that only gets tested when the cost is real, when doing the right thing means losing something or someone you love. I used to think integrity was easy for people who had nothing to lose. Now I think the opposite. It only counts when it costs you. When my brother sat at that defendant's table, part of me was grieving a version of him I grew up admiring. That grief was real. It still is. But grief and doing right can exist in the same chest at the same time. You don't have to resolve one to honor the other. What I want to say, if there's anything worth taking from all of this, is that the long way around is still a way. The years that looked like wandering were the years I was building something I couldn't yet explain. The title I eventually earned didn't come from a diploma. It came from showing up, from learning to think clearly under pressure, from refusing to let someone else's low expectations set my ceiling. I'm 31. I have a lot of years ahead of me, and I know now, in a way I couldn't have learned any other way, exactly what I'm made of.